The last time I sat at my own dining table as a guest in my own home, my daughter's husband looked me in the eye and said, "Diane, we love you, but you're not well enough to make decisions for yourself anymore." He said it the way you'd explain something to a child. Slowly, patiently, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. My daughter Brooke sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. She wouldn't look at me. And across from them sat a man I had never met, a man in a navy suit with a leather briefcase, who slid a stack of documents across the table and said, "Mrs. Hadley, this is simply a conservatorship petition. It's for your own protection." I looked at those papers. I looked at my daughter. I looked at Victor, her husband, who was watching me the way a person watches a slot machine right before the reels stop spinning, and I smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because I had spent the last 11 months waiting for exactly this moment. And everything I needed was already in the trunk of my car. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. Because if you're going to understand what happened at that table, you need to understand what came before it. All of it. My name is Diane Hadley, and for most of my adult life, I was the kind of woman people described with words like dependable and steady, and so easy to forget she's in the room. I didn't mind. I was a medical records supervisor at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. I worked there for 27 years. I was not flashy. I was not loud. I wore sensible shoes and kept my opinions measured and my filing systems immaculate. I raised my daughter Brooke, mostly by myself for the first 8 years of her life, after her biological father left when she was a toddler, and then with my second husband Frank, who came into our lives when Brooke was 9 and loved her like she was his own from the very first day. Frank was a civil engineer who understood two things better than anyone I've ever known: load-bearing structures and patience. He built things that lasted: bridges, water treatment facilities, commercial foundations. And on the side, quietly, carefully, over decades, he built wealth. Not the kind people talk about. The kind that compounds. He invested into commercial real estate around the Research Triangle area when prices were low. He bought into index funds and held them. He purchased a small stake in a logistics company that grew steadily for 15 years. He never bought a sports car. He never wore a watch that cost more than $40. We lived in the same 4-bedroom colonial in Mint Hill that we bought the year we got married. To anyone looking in, we were comfortable, middle class. Nothing remarkable. That was by design. Frank got his diagnosis on a Tuesday in March. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors were honest, we had months, not years. Brooke flew in from Denver, where she'd been living with Victor for about 2 years at that point. She cried. She held Frank's hand. She stayed for 4 days, and then she went back, because Victor had a work thing, she said, and couldn't manage the house alone. Frank didn't say anything about that, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. In his final weeks, Frank asked me to sit with him one evening after the nurse had gone. He was thin by then. The cancer had taken so much of him so quickly. But his mind was absolutely clear. He handed me a sealed envelope and a USB drive, and he said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Diane, I need you to understand something. What I've built is bigger than what we've shown. I kept it quiet on purpose, and I need you to hold all of it, every piece, until you're sure. Not sure about Brooke's love for you. I know she loves you. Sure about her judgment. Sure that whoever is standing next to her deserves to benefit from what took me 30 years to build." I told him I understood. He said, "I'm serious, Diane. Do not let sentimentality override your instincts. You have the best instincts of anyone I know. Trust them." Frank died 11 days later. He died at home in our bed with me beside him. Brooke made it back in time. She held his hand at the end. Victor did not come. He sent flowers and a text that said, "Thinking of you all." 3 weeks after the funeral, I sat down with Frank's attorney, a man named Mr. Calloway, in a quiet office on South Tryon Street. What he showed me made me grip the armrests of my chair until my knuckles went white. Frank had accumulated a portfolio that I had only partially known about. The commercial properties I knew. The index funds I knew. But there was more. A private brokerage account with holdings north of $2 million. A partnership stake in the logistics company that had been quietly paying distributions into a separate account for over a decade. A life insurance policy with a payout significantly larger than the one I'd been aware of. And all of it, every asset, every account, every distribution, placed into a revocable trust with me as sole trustee and with a specific clause, written in Frank's own hand and notarized, stating that any distribution to Brooke would occur only at my discretion, only after I had determined, in my sole judgment, that she was in a position, emotionally and relationally, to manage it responsibly. Frank had also left a letter inside the sealed envelope. I read it that night, alone in the kitchen. Then I folded it, put it back, and placed it in the fireproof safe in our bedroom closet. I did not change my life. I did not tell Brooke. I drove the same 2016 Honda Accord. I kept the same routines. I went to my water aerobics class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had coffee with my neighbor Linda on Saturday mornings. And I watched, carefully. Victor had entered Brooke's life about 3 years before Frank passed. Brooke met him at a real estate networking event in Denver. He described himself as a commercial property developer. He dressed like one. Slim cut suits, cufflinks, a watch that caught the light at just the right angle. He spoke with the easy confidence of a man who was used to being the most impressive person in the room. The first time I met him, when Brooke brought him home for Thanksgiving 2 years into their relationship, he shook my hand with both of his and said, "Mrs. Hadley, I've heard so much about you. This home is beautiful. Brooke told me it has incredible bones." He said incredible bones. Not what a lovely home, not. It's so nice to meet you. He assessed the structure. I smiled and said thank you and poured him iced tea. Over that Thanksgiving weekend, I noticed things. Small things. The kinds of things a quiet woman notices because she's not busy performing. Victor asked about the backyard. He asked about the property line. He mentioned very casually that properties in this neighborhood had appreciated significantly over the past decade. He asked Frank, who was still healthy at the time, whether the house was fully paid off. Frank gave him a flat look and changed the subject. And later that night, in bed, Frank said to me, "Diane, that man is taking inventory." I said I noticed. Frank said, "Keep noticing," so I did. After Frank died, the shift in Brooke's behavior happened gradually. That's the thing people don't prepare you for. It's not a dramatic overnight change, it's a slow turning of a dial. Brooke called me every day for the first 2 weeks after the funeral, then every other day, then twice a week, then once a week, and the calls got shorter. She started sentences with "Victor thinks." "Victor thinks you should sell the house because it's too much for one person." "Victor thinks you should consider a smaller place, maybe a condo." "Victor thinks it's not healthy for you to be alone in that big house with all those memories." I listened. I said I'd think about it. I didn't argue. Then one Sunday, about 4 months after Frank passed, Brooke called and said something that made every nerve in my body go still. "Mom, Victor and I have been talking, and we think it might make sense for us to relocate to Charlotte. We could move into the house, you could stay of course. But Victor thinks it makes more financial sense for the property to be in both our names, so if anything ever happened to you, there wouldn't be any legal complications." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment and looked at it. Then I brought it back and said, "That's a big decision, sweetheart. Let me sit with it. Victor says we shouldn't wait too long. The market is." "I heard you, Brooke. I'll think about it." She paused. Then quietly, "Okay, Mom." I hung up and sat in Frank's armchair for a long time. Then I called Mr. Calloway. Here is what I did not do. I did not confront Brooke. I did not call Victor and tell him what I thought of him. I did not cry or panic or make any decision from a place of emotion. I am not built that way. Frank married me because I am not built that way. What I did was ask Miss Calloway to connect me with someone who could help me understand exactly who Victor Davenport was. Not who he said he was. Who he actually was. Mr. Calloway referred me to a forensic accountant named Judith Pierce. Judith was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain, and a voice that could have belonged to a kindergarten teacher, except that what she said in that voice would have made a federal prosecutor sit up straight. Judith went to work. Within 3 weeks, a picture began to form. Victor's commercial development company, which he had described to Brooke as thriving and expanding into new markets, had not completed a project in 14 months. His last 2 developments had gone over budget, and one had resulted in a breach of contract lawsuit from an investor group in Colorado Springs. The lawsuit had been settled, but the terms were not favorable to Victor. His company's credit line had been frozen by his bank. He had personal credit card debt exceeding $90,000. And there was something else. Before Brooke, Victor had been in a long-term relationship with a woman 8 years his senior who owned a chain of physical therapy clinics in the Denver area. That relationship had ended when the woman discovered that Victor had, during their time together, persuaded her to add him to the deed of a vacation property in Breckenridge. After the breakup, there had been a legal dispute. The woman had won. Victor had walked away with nothing except the lesson that next time, he needed to be more careful. And here he was, being more careful. I kept all of this in a folder, a plain manila folder, that I kept in the fireproof safe next to Frank's letter. The visits started after that. Brooke and Victor flew to Charlotte 3 times over the next 5 months. Each time, Victor was warm, attentive. He brought me flowers. He fixed a squeaky hinge on the back door. He grilled steaks in the backyard and told stories that made Brooke laugh. He was performing, and he was good at it. But each visit had a purpose underneath the pleasantries. During the first visit, Victor mentioned that he and Brooke were getting serious about their financial future, and asked, very casually, whether Frank had left any paperwork I needed help sorting through. I told him Mr. Calloway handled everything and changed the subject to the azaleas. During the second visit, Brooke brought it up herself. She sat with me on the porch after Victor had gone inside and said, "Mom, I know this is awkward, but Victor and I are trying to plan. Did Dad leave a will? Is there anything I should know about?" I looked at my daughter. My girl. The child I had raised alone for 8 years, who used to curl up next to me on the couch and read chapter books out loud, who had Frank's stubbornness and my patience, or at least she used to. And I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't asking because she wanted to know. She was asking because she'd been told to ask. "Your father took care of everything, Brooke. When the time is right, you and I will sit down and go through it together. But not today." She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded. That night, I heard Victor's voice through the guest room door. Low but sharp. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. "She's stalling. And then, we need to move faster." I stood in that hallway for 10 seconds. Then I went to my bedroom and wrote down exactly what I had heard, the time and the date, in a small notebook I had started keeping. I had 11 entries in that notebook by then. The third visit was different. Victor brought a bottle of wine and a different energy. He was less charming and more direct. After dinner, he sat across from me and said, "Diane, I want to be honest with you. Brooke and I are going through a tough stretch financially. My company is restructuring and we've had some setbacks. We're not asking for a handout, but we've been wondering whether there's any way to access some of what Frank left behind, even a portion, just to bridge the gap." I looked at Brooke. She was staring at her plate. "Victor," I said, "Frank's estate is managed by an attorney and structured through a trust. I don't have the ability to simply write a check. But you're the trustee," he said, and the way he said it told me everything. He knew, he had looked into it. He knew exactly how the trust was structured, or at least enough to know that I had discretion. "I am," I said, "and I take that responsibility seriously." The silence that followed lasted about 6 seconds, but it felt like a full minute. Victor smiled. Brooke excused herself to the bathroom and the evening ended early. After they left the next morning, I called Judith Pierce and asked her to pull Victor's financial records for the past 6 months. What she found made the earlier picture look optimistic. Victor had taken out a personal loan of $120,000. The collateral listed was a property in Denver that, upon investigation, was not in his name alone. It was jointly held with a business partner, who, according to records, had no knowledge that the property had been used as collateral. There were also wire transfers from a joint checking account that Brooke and Victor shared. Transfers that went to a separate account in Victor's name only. Over $70,000 had been moved in 4 months. He wasn't just struggling financially. He was actively maneuvering money in ways that would eventually catch up to him. And he needed a new source before they did. That source was me. Or more precisely, it was Frank's trust. I sat with this information for 2 days. I did not call Brooke. I did not confront anyone. I prayed about it, which is something I don't talk about often, but which I do regularly. And then I called Mr. Calloway and said, "I think we need to prepare for something." He said, "I think you're right." 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in October, Brooke called and asked if she and Victor could visit the following weekend. She said they wanted to have dinner and talk about the future. Her voice sounded rehearsed. I said of course. They arrived on Friday evening. Victor carried grocery bags and insisted on cooking. He made chicken parmesan and opened a nice Chianti and talked about how much he loved Charlotte and how he could see them building a life here. Brooke was quieter than usual. She kept touching her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. The next morning, Saturday, I came downstairs at 8:30 expecting coffee and small talk. Instead, I found the dining table set with a formality that did not match a weekend breakfast. Brooke sat on one side, Victor sat on the other, and between them sat a man I had never seen before. Navy suit, leather briefcase, a legal pad already open in front of him. "Mom," Brooke said, and her voice cracked on the word. "This is Glenn Archer. He's an attorney." "Good morning, Mrs. Hadley," the man said. I looked at Victor. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me. "Diane," Victor said. "Please sit down. We need to talk about something important." I sat, I folded my hands, I waited. Victor spoke first. He told me, in a tone of deep and practiced concern, that he and Brooke had become worried about me over the past several months. He mentioned that I had seemed confused during their last visit. He mentioned that I had repeated myself during phone calls. He mentioned that a neighbor, someone he did not name, had expressed concern about my ability to manage daily tasks. He mentioned very delicately that given the size of the estate Frank had left behind, it would be irresponsible not to ensure that someone capable was overseeing things. Then Glenn Archer, the attorney, spoke. He explained, in a voice as warm and smooth as butter on a hot pan, that a conservatorship was not a punishment, it was a protection. It would simply mean that a designated party, in this case Brooke, acting in consultation with her husband, would have legal authority over my financial decisions and, if necessary, decisions about my living situation. He slid the papers across the table. He uncapped a pen. I looked at those papers for a long time. Then I looked at Brooke. "Sweetheart," I said. "Do you believe I'm not well?" Brooke's chin trembled. She looked at Victor. He gave her a small nod. "Mom, we're just worried about you. We want to make sure, Brooke. I'm asking you directly, do you believe in your heart that I am incapable of managing my own life?" She didn't answer. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at the tablecloth. That was my answer. I turned to Glenn Archer. "Mr. Archer, who retained your services? Mr. Davenport contacted me, thank you." I turned to Victor. "You hired an attorney to petition for conservatorship over your mother-in-law, in her own home, over breakfast." Victor's expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten on his crossed arms. "Diane, this isn't." "Excuse me for one moment," I said. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside to my car. I opened the trunk, I took out a gray folder and a small USB drive. I walked back inside, sat down, and placed both items on the table. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "I'd like to share a few things." I opened the folder. The first document was a letter from Calloway, on firm letterhead, confirming that I had undergone a comprehensive cognitive and psychological evaluation 3 weeks earlier, administered by a board-certified neuropsychologist at Carolina's Medical Center. The results were clear and unambiguous. I was fully competent, fully lucid, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. The evaluation had been conducted specifically in anticipation of a challenge to my capacity. I watched Victor's face as he read it. The color left it slowly, like water draining from a sink. The second document was a financial summary prepared by Judith Pierce. It detailed Victor's outstanding debts, his frozen credit line, the breach of contract settlement in Colorado Springs, the personal loan taken against a jointly held property without his partner's consent, and the wire transfers from the joint account with Brooke to his personal account. $73,000. Every transaction dated and sourced. Brooke picked up the document. Her hands were shaking. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, "is where your money has been going." The third document was a background summary. Victor's previous relationship. The legal dispute over the Breckenridge property. The pattern. The method. The outcome. I placed the USB drive beside the papers. This contains digital copies of everything, including recorded phone conversations in which Victor discussed, in his own words, his plans regarding this estate. Those recordings were made in accordance with North Carolina's one-party consent law, and Mr. Calloway has confirmed their admissibility. The room was silent. Glenn Archer closed his legal pad. He looked at Victor, then at me, then at the door. "I think," he said carefully, "that I should step out." "I think that's wise," I said. He left. I heard his car start 30 seconds later. Victor leaned forward. Diane, this is Victor. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I have been quiet for 11 months. I have watched you work on my daughter. I have listened to you coach her on what to say to me. I have tracked your finances. I have documented your behavior. I have consulted legal counsel, financial experts, and a licensed psychologist. I have done all of this legally, methodically, and patiently, because that is what my husband asked me to do. He asked me to protect our daughter, and that is exactly what I am doing. Victor looked at Brooke. Brooke was reading the financial summary. She was on the second page. Her tears had stopped. Something else had taken their place. Something colder. Brooke, Victor started. Don't, she said. She didn't look up, she just said it. One word. And it was the first time in a long time that I heard my daughter's own voice, not a version of it filtered through someone else. Victor stood up. He looked at me with an expression I had seen before, on the faces of people who realize they have underestimated someone so completely that there is no recovery. It is not anger. It is not shame. It is the specific bewilderment of a person who mistook stillness for stupidity. You had this planned the whole time, he said. I had this prepared, I said. There's a difference. I hoped I would never need to use it. Victor left the house within the hour. He packed a bag from the guest room, got in his rental car, and drove away without another word. Brooke stayed. She stayed for 9 days. The first 2 days she barely spoke. She sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, even though it was October in North Carolina and not that cold. She drank tea and stared at the yard and occasionally picked up her phone, looked at it and put it back down. On the third day, she started talking. She told me things I had suspected and things I hadn't. She told me that Victor had, over the course of their relationship, systematically convinced her that I was overbearing, that my love was possessive, that my closeness to Frank had been unhealthy, and that I was trying to replace Frank with her. She told me that Victor had described the trust as evidence that your parents didn't trust you, and that she had believed him. She told me that the conservatorship had been Victor's idea from the beginning, that he had researched it for months, that Glenn Archer was the third attorney he'd approached, because the first two had declined when they realized there was no medical basis for the petition. She told me that Victor had told her I was showing signs of dementia. She said, Mom, I feel like I've been living in a fog, like someone else was thinking for me and I didn't even notice. I put my hand on hers and said, that's exactly what it was, and it wasn't your fault. How did you know? She asked. Because your father told me to watch, and because I've spent 61 years being quiet enough to see what loud people miss. On the 5th day, Brooke called a divorce attorney in Denver. On the 7th day, she spoke with Judith Pierce herself and reviewed the financial records in detail. What she found was worse than what I had shown her. Victor had also opened 2 credit cards in Brooke's name without her knowledge. The balances totaled over $40,000. Brooke filed for divorce 2 months later. Victor contested it. His attorney attempted to claim that Brooke owed Victor a share of any future inheritance, arguing that the trust was a marital asset. Mr. Calloway shut that down in a single filing. Frank's trust was structured specifically to exclude spousal claims. Frank had written that clause himself, Mr. Calloway told me, and had spent an entire afternoon making sure every word of it was bulletproof. The divorce was finalized 5 months after that. Victor walked away with what he had brought into the marriage, which, once the debts were accounted for, was effectively nothing. The fraudulent credit cards were reported. Victor's misuse of the jointly held property in Denver as loan collateral was referred to his business partner's attorney, who filed a separate civil action. Brooke moved back to Charlotte. Not into my house. She rented a small apartment in Noda, the arts district, and got a job at a property management company, a real one. She started small. She was rebuilding and she wanted to do it on her own terms. She called me 3 times a week, sometimes more. We didn't talk about Victor. We talked about normal things, her commute, a recipe she tried, a show she was watching, the small ordinary things that families share when they're not performing for anyone. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat down with Mr. Calloway and began the process of distributing a portion of Frank's trust to Brooke. Not all of it. A meaningful portion, enough to allow her to put a down payment on a home and begin building the kind of stability that Frank had spent his life creating. The rest would follow in stages, as Frank's trust outlined, over time. When I told Brooke, she cried. Not the way she had cried at the dining table when Victor was watching. She cried the way a person cries when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone finally says, "You can put that down now." One evening, about a month after the first distribution, Brooke came over for dinner. We made Frank's recipe for spaghetti sauce together, the one with the fennel and the crushed red pepper that he refused to write down because he said real recipes live in your hands, not on paper. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where Victor had tried to take my life apart. After dinner, Brooke said, "Mom? Dad's letter. The one he left for you. What did it say?" I had kept that letter for nearly 2 years. I had read it once more, on the night before Brooke came home for those 9 days, just to remind myself why I was doing what I was doing. I went to the bedroom, opened the safe and brought it to her. She read it at the table. Her lips moved slightly, the way they used to when she was 7 and reading out loud. When she finished, she pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. Frank had written, "Diane, if things went the way I think they might, then you did what I couldn't do from here. You stood between our girl and something I saw coming but couldn't stop. I'm sorry I left you with this burden. But I chose you for it, because there is no one stronger, no one steadier, and no one who loves her more. You are the foundation I built everything on. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And when Brooke reads this, tell her that her father never doubted her heart, only the people who might try to take advantage of it." Brooke looked at me across that table and said, "I will never let someone come between us again." I reached across and took her hand and said, "I know you won't." We sat there until the kitchen was dark and the only light was the small lamp above the stove that Frank had installed crooked 20 years ago, and that I never fixed because it reminded me of him every time I turned it on. I did not tell this story to make myself look wise. I made mistakes. I waited too long in some moments. I was too cautious in others. There were nights I lay awake and wondered if I was wrong. If maybe Victor really did love my daughter and I was just a suspicious old woman who couldn't let go. Those doubts are real. They sit with you even when the evidence is clear, because, when it's your child, you want so badly to be wrong about the bad things. But here is what I have learned, and what I want to say to anyone who is listening. The quiet people in a family are not this weak. They are the ones carrying the most weight with the least noise. They are the ones who see the cracks forming before anyone else, because they are not distracted by the sound of their own voice. And when someone targets them, when someone looks at their silence and sees an easy mark, that person has made the most dangerous miscalculation of their life. Victor looked at me and saw a widow, a retired hospital worker in a paid-off house with a Honda in the driveway. He saw someone to move aside. He saw someone to manage. He saw someone whose daughter could be slowly turned against her until there was nothing left but a signature on a piece of paper. He did not see me. If you are sitting in your home right now, and someone in your family's life is slowly pulling your child away from you, telling them that your love is the problem, that your concern is control, that your presence is a burden, I am not going to tell you what to do. I don't know your situation. Every family is different. Every fracture has its own shape, but I will tell you this: do not announce your strength. Build it. Document it. Protect it. Let the people who underestimate you keep underestimating you. Your silence is not weakness. It is preparation, and the truth does not need to be loud to be devastating. Sometimes it just needs to be in a gray folder, placed on the table at exactly the right moment. And here is the question I want to leave you with. The one I still think about. Who in your life right now is being slowly convinced that you are not who you really are? And what would it take to show them the truth? Think about that, and if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. This is Selina Payback. We'll see you in the next one.